Hey, what is going on, everyone? Welcome back to the podcast. As you can see, we are back and better than ever. We got a new studio. We've got a lot more technology, too. Before, I was basically running this thing on a small laptop, and it really limited what we could do. And you can kind of see that in the last podcast we did with number 56 with Ken and Amy, when we asked Ken to, I think, bring up something from Los Angeles or something that we were going to put on the computer in the background, and it took a really long time. And that was basically the technology I was dealing with. Now we are upgraded, studio upgraded, computer upgraded, and you're going to kind of see how that's going to work as the podcast starts. But before we, before we really get into it, I just wanted to kind of talk about, all the things that have happened since we talked last. I mean, it almost feels like we've come full circle in the way that I think when we did this podcast last time, Twitter was just purchased by Elon Musk, and it has gone through this whole summer. It was, he bought it, he wasn't going to buy it, he's going to try to get out of it, they're going to court, now he's buying it. So as this podcast starts back up again, we've in a way come full circle when it comes to the Elon Musk story. Also, the other one would be about that lady, I think it was Sherri Pappini. Actually, I'm looking at it right now before we get into it. I do remember us talking about it. I think it was announced that she was being arrested for the false statements, and over the summer they've released the video footage of that, and we'll probably check that out as well. And off the top of my head, I can't really remember. Those are the two things that I remember most that we talked about in the beginning of that podcast, and I just kind of find it interesting that as we start our new podcast, or the new podcast, however many months later, that those things kind of found themselves in the news. Trying to think if there are any other announcements here before we get going. I think that's it. I just wanted to kind of talk about that, the old stuff, the new podcast. All right, well, let's get to it, folks, shall we? Ready, set, podcast! Okay, so as you can see, the camera is kind of a little on the so I'm going to have to replace that, so I apologize if that is annoying to everyone. Bear with me. As you can see, I've been working a lot over the summer to get this studio up and running. I mean, I even got soft lighting, so there won't be any crappy lighting anymore. That didn't make a lot of sense, did it? Okay, anyway, we'll shut the fuck up here. So, quickly, firstly, and maybe lastly, I'll keep begging, but let's not forget, folks, to like and follow the podcast on our Facebook page. We can subscribe to our YouTube page. We are on Spotify. Give us a follow there. iHeartRadio. Basically, wherever you may follow or watch your podcast, we are most likely there. All right, so this kind of crossed my mind the other day. This is kind of the first story we're going to jump into here. Just really something I've noticed is, when I was about 12, 13 years old, The Sandlot had just come out, and me and my friends, we loved that movie. And if you're wondering, I was squinch. Ironically, to this day, I don't understand. I think it was just because I had glasses. It had nothing to do with, getting the hot girl or the Wendy Peppercorn, if you will, making moves like that, because trust me, that was not me. I was really more like whoever was the annoying guy on the crew, I guess, giving everyone a hard time, But honestly, there was not a character in that show written for me. But I'm sure, like everyone, you kind of view yourself as the main character, as Smalls, as that's how I did. But getting to the point here, what I find hilarious about The Sandlot is that in that movie, it came out in 1992, 93, and they were trying to say, like, hey, these are a bunch of kids that grew up in the 60s. 30 years has passed since their, childhood. And here they are in the 90s. And that got me thinking, like, oh, geez, how much time has passed since I've watched the movie? 30 years? Ooh. So, yeah, it just kind of crossed my mind, like, oh, geez, the same amount of time that has passed in The Sandlot from 62 to 92 is this same exact amount of time between 92 and 2022. And unfortunately, I'm not calling a baseball game, giving my friend the thumbs up as he steals home. But, what are you going to do? Okay, well, let that sink in as we all get older and older. Okay, so I talked about this earlier. Let's go into our first story here. And there it is. We're going to talk about the Sherri Pappini thing and just kind of give everyone a little refresher in what happened. She's an American woman, disappeared on November 2nd, 2016, reportedly while out jogging. Here, let me highlight this for you so you guys can follow what's going on. Jogging a mile from her home in Redding, California. Pappini was 34 years old at the time, and she reappeared 3 weeks later on Thanksgiving Day. November 24th, having been reportedly freed from her captors at 4:30 in the morning. Well, gee, that's very... what do these captors say? Like, it's Thanksgiving Day, and very soon we're going to let you go. It's almost like she knew she had to be somewhere at a certain time. I mean, you get captured. The last thing you want is, your kids to miss you on Thanksgiving. Well, that was extremely lucky. They found her restraints on the side of County Road 17 near Interstate 5 in Yolo County. Well, that's kind of ironic. About 150 miles south of where she disappeared. And I think if you go to the next paragraph, on March 3rd, 2022, she was arrested for making false charges. On March 9th, she was released. Oh, she was released. Okay, so anyway, whatever. We get the gist. We have a lady that basically faked her own kidnapping, and for what? That was the mystery at the time. Well, thankfully, the sheriff's office or the county released this little video for us. So let's take a look at that. Can I zoom in? Fuck it. We'll just play it right here.
I know you didn't do anything wrong. Right now, you're not telling the truth, which is doing something wrong.
Sherri Pappini was recently sentenced to 18 months in prison for faking her own interrogation or whatever, faking her own kidnapping in 2016. Footage of Pappini's, let me pause this, recent interrogation was also released by I can't read which sheriff's office that is, but released by the sheriff's office. She is seen in the video being confronted by detectives in 2020. All right, so here, actually, let's back this up. So the timeline of this is very interesting because this lady's husband, okay, like, just to break this down really quick, this is what women of Sherri Pappini, I mean, an average woman is most likely going, I'm not trying to venture into the manosphere here, but like just off the top of my head from what I know, an average woman is going to do way better than, even, a decent guy, I don't want to say high value male, because obviously they're going to have the pick of the litter, but if you take an average female and an average male, their experiences are wildly different. And you can kind of see that through this lady's actions. And one of the things you kind of see with this is people, or women I guess specifically in some cases, don't really have any accountability for their actions. And if you don't believe me, please check out the Fresh and Fit After Hours podcast. They've talked to almost 1,500 women, and time after time, it doesn't matter where they're from, what they do, they have the same delusional lack of accountability in their brain. And this is kind of spotlighted right here in this Sherri Pappini case. All right, so back to this. She claimed that she was held by two Hispanic women who took steps to keep their faces hidden from her. Again, this is very, very convenient. By wearing masks or keeping her head covered. Pappini was branded on the top of her right shoulder during her captivity. Blah, 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 blah. Let's get to the good stuff here. At the time, the sheriff was still in active investigations. We're looking for a dark-colored SUV, Hispanics armed with a handgun. The sheriff indicated there was sensitive information not being released at this time. Detectives had authored close to 20 search warrants, as they said they are examining cell phone records. Okay, and then so that's just kind of talking about like how they tried to figure out what was going on. According to Bosenko, Keith Pappini, we should call him Keith the Cuck Pappini, that has been cooperative and even volunteered for a polygraph, which he passed. However, Bosenko has not ruled him out as a suspect in the abduction. So this poor fucking guy, he works at Best Buy, okay? So we already know why she kind of went on a 2-week abductical. And, he does the right thing and sticks next to her, sticks by her. It's his wife. He wants to believe her. He doesn't want to believe this little annoying little ting in the back of his head telling him, like, are you sure this is what she's saying it is? Because I guarantee you this probably isn't the first time she's been shady. I mean, considering the length of the amount of effort she put into this to hide what she was doing, I mean, suggests that already. So to kind of jump ahead, what looks like happened is they started to figure out this lady was full of crap. And, we'll jump in here. The client did comment on any specific ongoing investigation. Actually, let me jump back here. So Keith volunteered, did a polygraph. They said he passed it. We are keeping an open mind and looking at all avenues. Keith had been reported as a possibly compromising the investigation with his statements to the media after Sherri was found. Oh, interesting. I did not see that, nor did I research that enough to look up those comments, but it doesn't matter. I mean, there's two things going on here. Either, he was aware that she's kind of had sketchy behavior and that she probably was up to something and was trying to just, defend her so he doesn't look like a fucking cuck, or he's just a fucking cuck. I mean, there's really nothing in between there. Pappini was found with both male and female DNA on her, neither of which matched her or her husband. Whoa, okay. Well, that's interesting. So there's female DNA, male DNA, neither is her or her husband. What is this freaky bitch up to? The FBI ran the samples through the combined DNA index systems, CODIS, as you know from all those CBS dramas, and found no matches. So at least she's not hanging out with felons. That's good. In March 2022, it was reported that the DNA found on her clothing matched that of an ex-boyfriend, plot twist, James Reyes, who confirmed that Pappini stayed with him during the time that she was allegedly kidnapped. Okay, so I'm pretty sure if we watch the podcast, number 56, that's kind of where I was at the time. Maybe it was announced, so I don't want to give myself that much of a pat on the back, but I do remember thinking like, all right, it's pretty obvious what's going on here, but now that they have the DNA, it became pretty hard to hide. Now, let's go back to the video because this is where it gets interesting. So this is where the husband discovers his wife has been lying to him for almost 6 years. Let's watch that.
The DNA doesn't lie.
I mean, that's what I would say, too, if I was confronted with this. Lady, you've been lying to your husband for 6 years, and you were banging someone else for 2 weeks, and possibly his girlfriend, too.
His DNA was on you.
There's no way.
Detectives spoke privately with Pappini's husband as well, and that's going to be what's coming up here.
Now you're telling me, okay, you guys can go home now. Well, do you think I want her anywhere around my kids or around me at all at this point?
And again, we've talked a lot. I don't know what the next stages of this are. That's why.
It's not us together, I get that one.
Damn. And that's the end of that video. So he basically says, fuck this bitch. She made me look like a cuck. Even though I am a cuck, I stood by this bitch for 6 years, and she was banging James that whole time. Oi. That is rough. Let's get back to our main screen here. I'm sure you guys want to stare at that. Again, I apologize for the camera. I'm going to have to definitely do something about that. Okay, so actually there's a few things I want to wrap up here before we move on to the next story here. So this guy stayed with her for 6 years through this whole ordeal. Now, you can kind of say, like, oh, he was trying to stick by his woman, his wife, and they got kids. Like, again, I understand that. But, like, show me, other than Elizabeth Smart, out of the, 260 years or whatever this country has been around, I mean, has there ever been a kidnapping outside of the Elizabeth Smart situation where someone gets kidnapped, miraculously is released right before Thanksgiving or on it? I forgot what day Thanksgiving is. And, no shady questions are asked. I mean, again, I think it's great that he was sticking next to his wife and wanted to keep his family together, but clearly he did that at a detriment to himself, and now he looks like an idiot. She made him look like an idiot, and, I mean, I'll give, at least the guy wasn't like, throwing chairs and stuff, because I don't think anyone would have blamed him. Now, what was also interesting about this, let me see if I can actually set this up for us so we can all look at this. Yeah, so she was actually charged with making false statements to federal law officers for mail fraud, and according to the Department of Justice, fabricated the story of her abduction when she was staying with her boyfriend at the time. Now, what was interesting, what she had done is, because California is fucking California, they have this thing called the Victims Compensation Fund. And basically, if you're a victim of a crime, which I can't imagine how much money this board has nowadays since 2020, she received $30,000 in victims compensation. So that was why she was tried for mail fraud. So I remember when I was looking into this, I'm like, what is this mail fraud thing all about? And that was because she went to California. Was like, I was a victim and I need money, which I guess, I mean, her husband works at Best Buy. I doubt this lady's working. She took a 2-week sabbatical. I forgot what I called it earlier. Damn it. And I mean, she got paid $30K for it, and then she's going to jail, I guess. And I just find that fascinating that her husband did not leave her until they filed those federal charges. And it's just amazing. Like, again, I get it. Some guys want to stick by their wives and do it, but it's just like, at a certain point, cut your fucking losses. You look like me hanging on to crypto last year. Whoa. Okay. Well, if you agree, if you disagree, why don't you let me know in the comments? If you like what you see, I mean, please share the podcast. If you disagree, let me know. I'd be happy to have this discussion with you in the comments. Again, this podcast is at a point right now where you guys can interact with me, and I'm not going to be just some guy that lets you comment and then I don't ever, like or comment back. That's not what we got here. All right, so we're going to move on to our next story here. This one I found very interesting. This kind of comes out from the Chicago Sun-Times, and it's just kind of shows you the state of the state of politics that we're in right now, and just how fucking ridiculous things can be and how petty people can be as well. All right, let's pull that article up. All right, so what we have here is infighting at a suburban library is an example of growing governmental dysfunction. The brouhaha in Niles, Maine feels like a piece of a larger story in which many of these elected to public positions have a little interest in making government work. All right, so let's just start going through here. Politics has always been a rough and tumble arena that can bring out the worst in people. I mean, if you don't believe that, I mean, look at the Democrats between 2016 and now. And even the Republicans when Obama got elected. Or even Democrats when George Bush got elected. And Republicans when Clinton got. I mean, I can keep going here. But these days, we seem to be witnessing more instances in which politicians at every level, I got to remember to do this, appear more intent on battling the other side than coming together to make government work. In one unfortunate example, the bitterly divided board of trustees of the North Suburban Niles, Maine Library District has been at loggerheads to the point that little gets done, including doing more than making temporary patches to fix the leaking roof. Whoa, that's pretty bogged down in bureaucracy. After one member of the 7-member board resigned more than a year ago, the remaining 3-member blocks have been able to agree on little, including the appointment of a replacement board member. I mean, that's pretty crazy. You have 7 people, one guy retires, and I mean, it makes you wonder: did he retire because he just couldn't deal being the swing vote between these 2-3 voting blocks? I mean, if that's the real story there. Or maybe the guy was just an old fuck and he decided to retire, and that sent this whole library board into chaos. And it just shows you, like, these 3 blocks are so deadlocked, they can't even agree on what it said earlier on how to, patch it, to fix the roof, and not even like in a totality way, just like Band-Aid fixes on the roof. They can't even agree to stuff like that. I mean, I've been in relationships like that before. Those are not fun. And then even on top of that, if that doesn't make it as bad, they can't even agree to bring, which person to bring on in that 7th seat. And that's pretty obvious what's going on there. Is obviously these 3 blocks these 3 voting blocks are jockeying to get their person in that 7th seat so they can have their agenda basically, pushed through. Where were we here? So because the board showed no sign of reaching a resolution, the legislator stepped in and unanimously passed a law enabling the Secretary of State Jesse White, who is also the state librarian, to fill the vacancy if the board couldn't manage to do so within 90 days. Okay, there's a lot to kind of break down here. So the board showed no sign of reaching a resolution. So the legislature, that's the Illinois state legislature, stepped in and unanimously, I sound like Nancy Pelosi. The legislature stepped in and unanimously passed a law enabling the Secretary of State Jesse White to pass or to fill the vacancy. Okay, let's talk about how kind of crazy that is. So you have a township between Niles and Maine. So for those that aren't in the Chicago area, I grew up there. I understand. My high school played Niles North. We played Maine South. And for those that have seen The Breakfast Club, that movie was filmed in the Maine North School, that's no longer there. I think actually, a little side note here, when they did, what fucking movie was that? Breakfast Club. That library, they actually built it in the gym. So it's a library, but it's a set, built in the gym. And they actually did that with Home Alone as well. That's on the Movies That Made Us on Netflix. Check it out. It's a really cool how they built the interior of the house. And they did it over the pool at, Nutria West, I believe. Anyway, before I totally get lost in where I'm at here. What I just think is so crazy about, that's right. So Niles and Maine is basically like the northwest side of Chicago, the suburbs of Chicago. So, if it's basically like Niles is the area that is just north and west of Chicago, and Maine is like Park Ridge. Like if you think of where Hillary Clinton lived at Park Ridge, Park Ridge is basically the suburb you get out of to right when you leave the city. So like that most northwest, I'm sure Chicagoans are probably like yelling at me right now if they even watch this. But the point is, it's out on that northwest side of the city, but it's across the city lines. It's in the suburbs. So basically you have these like rich white people arguing over stupid shit about the library is kind of where we're at right now. And then the state of Illinois comes in because they realize, nothing's going to get done because of these 6 fucks. So they said, okay, because we're basically communists, we're going to take central authority and cram it down your throats. And I know some of you probably don't agree with me on that one, but let's understand federalism. The whole point of the United States government, the whole system, is so you're not being governed by some jackass thousands, 100 miles away from where you lived. It has to always, our government is always around local control because, again, when we were a colony, we were basically being told by some king thousands of miles away, an ocean away on top of that, you have to, pay taxes on paper or whatever. I won't go into all that, but you see what I'm saying. We have a central authority trying to cram down its agenda on people that have no representation, which is obviously what the American Revolution was about. In this situation, obviously there is representation involved, but this is a little bit different from that because we're not talking about, this is a library board. Like there's no one representing a library board in Springfield, if you will. So this whole thing has to, the system is designed for this thing to take place locally. That's why these board members get to pick their own person, right? Because they're part of the local community. I mean, ideally. I wouldn't be surprised if both of these people are scattered out throughout the whole Chicagoland area and they were appointed, but whatever. We'll ignore that. Either way, they're still in the community. Springfield is not Chicago. Chicago is not Springfield. Springfield is not the Chicago suburbs, okay? So you can't have people or a central authority figure of power or body, if you will, like the legislature, telling someone, hundreds of miles away, no, you got to pick this guy. This is your guy. This is your guy. And, I'm sure if you're the 3 voting block, that's the Democrats, you're like, yeah, sure. But that is not what happened, believe it or not. All right, let's continue on. The board couldn't agree, so Jesse White, the Secretary of State, appointed Umar Kadir. I'm sure him being appointed had nothing to do with, I'm sure it had everything to do with his merits and nothing to do with diversity and all that good stuff, who previously sat on the board for 4 months after having been appointed to fill an earlier vacancy about 2 years ago. Well, I'm going to be eating my previous words right now. So this was kind of the idea here. We had a guy that used to sit on the board. This actually makes a lot of sense. So they say, okay, we'll bring in this guy that used to sit on the board. Maybe he can bring back some, I can't even think of the word, people getting along, whatever. End of story? Not exactly. A sitting board member filed for a temporary restraining order against White's pick, preventing Kadir from participating in meetings, leaving the stalemate in place. On October 7th, Cook County Circuit Court Judge Allison Conlon made the restraining order permanent. Now, State Senator Laura Murphy, Democrat from Des Plaines, has filed legislation, she told us, will be acted on in the next month's veto session to make clear White's pick can take his seat. So That is nuts. Okay, so let's review really quickly here. So the board couldn't agree on who they wanted to bring in. So Jesse White, the Secretary of State, said, all right, we're going to give you this guy, this person who used to be on the board. Now, this just shows you how toxic this board was. Again, the article doesn't talk about if this person worked with anyone previously, if they did or they didn't. I mean, these are all pretty small circles anyway, so chances are they know who this person is. And even knowing who this was, they still didn't want them. And again, the article doesn't go into the exact wonkiness of it, because really what I want to know is why exactly do they not want this person on here? Did they work with him before and he's just a dick? Like what is it? I would like to believe that what is going on here is that these 6 people don't want Springfield telling them what to do. And as you can see, you have state senators like Laura Murphy from Des Plaines who are hell-bent on cramming this seat down Niles, Maine Township Library Board's throat. And that's fucking crazy. Crazy. I apologize if I'm screaming into the mic too. All right, so let's keep going here. So how does the infighting help the library serve its patrons? We're not sure, because it doesn't. A Niles, Maine librarian told us patrons say they want an end to the conflict, as well as an end to both hiring freeze and a cutback in hours. The brouhaha in Niles, Maine feels like a piece of a larger nationwide story in which many of those elected to governmental seats or who are running for them seem to have less interest in making government work than sticking it to the opposition. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? These are the toxic politics that I've been talking about nonstop for who knows, for almost since this podcast even started. It drives me up the wall. Up the wall. I mean, this goes back to 2008 or 2009 when Obama got elected, and my Facebook feed turned into just people getting drunk to Obama's a socialist. I mean, there were people that I didn't even know that were Republicans when I lived out there in Chicago that were just like totally anti-Obama. And at the time, I just was more worried about watching the Cubs try to win a World Series, which I had a long way to go at that point. But the vitriol that was being thrown at Obama was just, for someone who didn't pay attention to politics, was kind of like, what? And then during that whole time from 2009, during his 2 terms in office, he was just like, the whole time, how could you say something about Barack? How could you? I don't see how you could say something like. And then Trump runs for president, and we know how the last 6 years went. So I just think these toxic policies. The toxic politics are really what the problem is. And this article kind of highlights that, because it's sometimes more about not getting anything done and just sticking it to the other side. Sticking it! Somehow America needs to nurture a strong sense of civic mindedness in which we recognize we are all in this together. Political factions will never agree on everything, but they should do a better job of seeking common ground. And that is very, very true. Because we are just in this situation right now where you can't find common ground anywhere. I mean, it's crazy to me that even like let's use a few of these races, like the governor's race in Arizona right now. You have it's Carrie Lake, who I used to watch on Fox News when the local Fox News affiliate out there. So it's just crazy to me to see her running for governor. I think it was her and Troy. It was Troy something. I like that guy. Or maybe she was the 6 o'clock with John Hook. Either way, I think that's what she did. So the 6 o'clock with John Hook and Carrie Lake. But she was great on the news. She's doing a great job, and she's going against, I think, Katie Hobbs in the governor's race. And this lady she's not interested in debating her. She's not interested in being civil. Her whole campaign seems to just call her an election denier and not wanting to engage her on the excuse like, that she is just, a problem or a threat to democracy. Well, if she is, you should probably talk to her about it. And, if you're going to tell people from Arizona, like, hey, I want to stick up for you, you should probably start doing that in a debate and not hiding from everyone. Anyway, so let's move on to our next story here. I call this one, this is going to be our undercard story. How far are we into this? Ooh. All right, you know what? Actually, so I was going to talk about the Chicago Bears. I'll do it really quickly because we're going to do another episode and, more of an elongated thing. This, I think I was just going to kind of bitch about them for a minute, but they played New England last night and they looked, pretty good here. They won. I turned the game off about 4 minutes left in the fourth quarter because I'm on the East Coast and these games go way too late out here. But they won 33-14. They're now 3-4. Fields looked pretty good. I mean, he was making some pretty decent throws. They were rolling him out to the right. He wasn't just checking it down. He was hitting, the backside route coming over the middle. That was really nice to see. They were pretty accurate throws. Not all of them were accurate, but it was a pretty wet field, I will say, as well. Then you can see why they like this guy. A lot of quarterbacks the Bears have had in the past, they drop back, and if they don't get the ball in time, they're basically, like cement. They might as well have cement in their shoes, and it's just a matter of time before they go down. He, time and time again, was able to, if he dropped back, couldn't find anything, was able to run himself into a first down, which I don't even want to. I mean, the third down conversion rate was something I had never seen for the Bears in the 30-something years I've been watching them. So it was pretty impressive to see. And considering, this is Bill Belichick, this is a New England team. I mean, Mac Jones looked horrible in the first quarter. They bring in that I forget, Zapke. I don't even know what his name is. And he just lit up the Bears. I was like, oh, well, that was over. That was fun while it lasted. But, I mean, the Bears came out in the second half, and they looked pretty good. They were able to score points on them to stop them on top of that. So that was definitely nice. And it makes me wonder. So New England's 3-4, so I don't want to get too excited about that. But really what begs the question here is, what the fuck is going on with Green Bay? I mean, we beat San Francisco, and then Green Bay beat us. And then we beat Houston and then lost like the next 3 in a row. And this is what I find that's interesting. Those 3 that we lost to, New York, Minnesota, and Washington, all beat Green Bay. So how the fuck is this possible where Green Bay beats us 27-10 and then, I think at that point they had lost to New York. If not yet, they did in the next coming weeks. I mean, Washington beat them on Sunday. Minnesota beat them, and I remember them being beat by New York. I don't think they've played. Actually, let me click on their schedule here. Let me see here what we got here. That's right. They beat the Buccaneers. That's right. So they by week 3 they got their ass kicked in Minnesota. Then they beat the Bears and then beat the Buccaneers. So at 2-1, they were looking pretty good. That's right. Then they beat the Patriots. See, this makes no sense to me. How the fuck did the Packers beat us? They look fucking horrible. The Bears look even worse. And we beat the Patriots. They beat the Patriots, but we lost to them. They lose to the Giants. They lose to the Commanders and the Jets. Like it's just, I don't understand that. But like I said, we will break that down. We'll go into the Bears further. But I did want to kind of say kudos to the Bears for winning that game last night, but I really don't have any high hopes for them. I mean, it is the Bears. They look so bad, but they still always end up with a mediocre record, so they can never pick anyone that would actually make a difference on the team. And I will say this about the draft. From now on, just draft fucking playmakers. Quit fucking around. Don't try to get cute with the draft board. Look at the offensive side of the ball. Can the guy make a play? No, then draft someone on the defensive side of the ball that can, because that's what you need in the NFL right now. I mean, in fact, look at what was going on with New England. A few of those plays that they had made were made by playmakers. There was a really great catch in the second quarter, and that was made by, I can't remember who the New England receiver was, but those are the kind of plays that the Bears need to make. Okay, so we're going to move on to our last story here. And actually, let's do this real quick. Okay, so I'll start this way. So when I like watching podcasts, and one of the things I'm going to do with this with the podcast going forward is kind of, especially with the new technology that we have, is I can play, as you see, I can play videos now and we can react to them. And one of the things I want to do is look at some other podcasts that are, either like middle of the road, left to the right, and, kind of maybe point out like some of the asinine things that they say. But for the most part, there's a lot of podcasts that I like. Some people, they just can't help their partisan ways. And I mean, I'm no different. I'm sure if you watch the 57 episodes that we've done throughout the last 3 years, like I definitely have, especially before January 6, 2021, I definitely leaned pretty right, you know what I mean? And I don't mean like extreme right or anything like that. It was just, I was really buying into the Trump presidency. I liked what he was doing, but I didn't realize how many of these establishment stooges were also around him that was basically causing me to get kind of more wrapped up into it than I should be. And I realized that the best way to kind of approach that is the same way that I approach the Chicago Bears, is that you literally just have to have the pom-poms in your back pocket. Do I like Trump? Do I like DeSantis? Yes, but I'm not going to sit there and just rah them on just because. I mean, what is this, North fucking Korea? So anyway, there's a lot of podcasts that like to talk about politics. Obviously, we are one of them. One of them specifically that I used to really like was on it was called Rising. So there's a publication called The Hill. They had a YouTube channel. I think it's called Rising. And on Rising was these two people, it was Saagar and Jetty and Krystal Ball. And I really liked them because on Rising, it was basically, he's a Republican, she's a Democrat, and they're going to give it to you through the right or the left, through their perspective. And it was a really good show. It was good, great. I think they still have it. But it's at the same time, it's still corporate news. And I think around June of 2021, they went on Joe Rogan and announced that they were going to start their own podcast and not or independent media news form, and they called it Breaking Points. And obviously, the whole idea of it was independent media. They don't have to hit all these news stories in 5 to 6 minutes. They can. It's their business. They can extend their segments as long as they want. They can talk about whatever they want. And it was a great idea. I liked it. I started watching it. I listened to it on Spotify on my ways while I'm working or on my way to work, whichever. And it was great. I loved Saagar. He was great. Then there's Krystal. She's a little bit left wing for me, but it almost was cool because it allowed you to listen to a subject and hear both points of it instead of having to listen to Ben Shapiro and then David Pakman, which I listen to David Pakman and it is fucking hard to listen to that guy. But I mean, he's good. I'll give him credit where credit is due. But about April of last year, things started kind of to change as I'd been listening to Breaking Points, and it was becoming ever apparent that this show, it's not that it wasn't, I don't know, I was just starting to become annoyed with the partisan hackery. I don't even want to be mean, but just how the partisanship that was going on in it. And with Saagar, originally it was like, yo, I'm a Republican, I look at things from the right, but then, we'll get into that in a second here. So what I did is, back in April, I kind of went on Twitter and ranted, if you will, about that. And I'm going to kind of rant about it again. Actually, let's do this. You can read along with me my rants. Here we go. Okay, so I really like the points community, Breaking Points, but after 1 year of watching this show, not including the time on Rising, I've reached my breaking points. Nice one, me. For me, I like the dichotomy of politics between Saagar and Krystal Ball. It feels that difference of opinion has slowly melded in some weird non-establishment outsider-insider messaging. One day it dawned on me that I'm watching a former White House correspondent and MSNBC talking head who was formerly married to a VC. I want to break that down, but I'm going to keep going here. These two people, they aren't like us. They're not working class. These are people on the fringes of upper crust society. They have access to people that you and I will never intersect during our day-to-day lives. Saagar used to work at the White House. Krystal Ball used to work at MSNBC. Okay, so yeah, that's why I was kind of holding off. All right, so anyway, so what we got here is two people who are, when you watch the show, now when they do, I almost call it Rising, when they do Breaking Points, they're not so, they're a little bit more open about their political positions. Krystal Ball obviously is a Bernie Sanders Democrat, and Saagar these days, he's I don't want to call him a never Trumper, but he's in this Republican Party that is like non-establishment, but like, remember, he was a White House correspondent, so there's some form of establishment. He's establishment media, and as much as he's trying to market himself on this show that he's not, well, he is. I mean, you worked at the White House, you were a White House correspondent. Like, it doesn't get any more inside DC than that. And with Krystal Ball, Well, let's just okay. We'll explain. We're gonna explain that here, right here. Ignore these photos for a second. These aren't jobs that come to normies. Krystal Ball's famous photos are an example. How many times have you run for Congress, get sandbagged, and then end up working for MSNBC? And remember, when you're a talking head on corporate news media, you're making a decent chunk of change. I mean, I don't know off the top of my head what these contracts are, but you're not making $9 an hour at Starbucks. And being formerly married to a VC on top of that doesn't really strike me as the average American. Yeah, folks, this chick was married to a venture capitalist. No one, I mean, it's not like this information is publicly available, nor do I care about her fucking marriage, but it clearly had fucking failed too. She had like 2 or 3 kids with this guy. She posts these kids on Instagram all the time. And I'm sure some of you are wondering about these pictures here. So this was taken, I want to say, at a Christmas party in early 2000s, about 20 years ago or so. And this chick right here, Krystal Ball, on the right center here and right there, decided to run for a seat in Virginia. And it's kind of funny, actually. These photos, okay, remember, this is before social media. These photos weren't sitting on the internet somewhere. At least I don't think they were. They look like Polaroids. Yeah, they are. They're Polaroids. Or not Polaroids, but you know, the I believe that's the kind of photos you'd have to take to like Walgreens and have them do the 1 hour photo on. So someone had these stashed somewhere and didn't like her, runs for office, and they just casually drop them off at her opponent's office, and they get leaked. And I think if you look up the story, the guy she ran against was like, I do not think that these photos should be released. They are abhorrent, and I totally... what did he say? He condemned the person that released them, and I think he did that with a wink. Anyway, so with Krystal here, the big thing with her is like she's trying to say like, yeah, I'm for the worker, I'm for you, I'm like you, I live in rural Virginia. I think I have a tweet about that at some point too, and it just rings hollow because you're everything but that. You know what I mean? Like you kind of remind me of a friend's girlfriend who. She's like, I'm just like one of you guys as she dumps money into her money market account. Anyway, I quit saying that. But anyway. So I like Saagar. His politics and ideas seem to align with mine and many others. But this idea that this person sees the world the same way as everyone else who works a shit job is a bit misguided. For instance, to work in Washington, you must live in Washington. And that city is not known for its cheap housing. So how would one who is working his way to becoming a White House correspondent afford to live there without an outside subsidy helping? Hint, they can't. So if you're kind of a little lost there, wondering what I'm talking about, if you go to work, in Washington as, a staffer, anyone in the media, like, unless you don't want to commute an hour into work, you have to live in Washington, D.C. And like San Francisco, it's very, very, very expensive. So if you're fresh out of college, you get this, White House correspondence job for whichever news media you're working for, you're going to have to live in Washington, or you're going to have to do a lot of driving. But chances are most people don't want to do that, so they're going to live in Washington. I mean, because, again, your social circles are there, too. These people love to drink. No one's driving an hour home, especially in today's society, that loaded, or paying for an Uber, even though they probably could afford it. Anyway, there I go. Anyway. So what's interesting is that, this person who's, again, he's not claiming that he's working class or for the working class or anything like that. But this whole, like, it reminds me of like these rich dudes that would come into restaurants or, wherever and, go above and beyond, and not in like they go above and beyond to make it known like, I am just like you. And it's like, yeah, I appreciate that. That's cool. But you're not, because your loafers are about 4 paychecks worth of, about 4 of my paychecks. All right. So, and again, when you come out of college and get a job, it's not like you're making a boatload of money where you could afford to live in a city like that. So obviously, Saagar, if this is the case, he's not like working class. Working class people don't go into jobs like being a White House correspondent. It's just not how it works, because it's just not a working class job. It used to be, but then when people started to realize like, oh wow, there's a lot of clout that comes with this job, all the rich kids wanted to start doing it. Let's get this. And this mindset has been demonstrated very subtly, I must add, in a few of his breaking points radars. I think radars are what they had when they were at the Hill. Breaking points is like their monologues now. And I've seen through the years. One in particular comment he made was about Uber drivers and not fathoming how someone could drive around all day making only $60K a year. And this is kind of what I was spotlighting at earlier. Like someone who is, who isn't this privileged kid, like this kid or like Saagar probably is, wouldn't have a problem understanding that, not fathoming how someone could drive around all day only making $60,000 a year. First of all, $60,000 a year is not something to sneeze at. You know what I mean? That's enough. Again, it's average money, but it's, you're not priced out of housing. You could still get could you buy a house? Could you have a car? I mean, that's all questionable because everyone's finances are different. But the point is, $60,000 a year is, off the top of my head, oh geez, of course I'm not gonna be able to do math right now. That's $6 a month, roughly. It's pretty. You can live on that even after the taxes. And if you live in a state like Florida or Nevada or Texas, you're going to be making more money there. So this whole idea that, like, I can't understand how someone drives around all day and only makes $60K. It's like, dude, how disconnected are you? Come on. It's a tell. I used to see this attitude working in restaurants. Hey, I think I just said this. As a server and manager, these white-collar folks waltz in, some having worked in a restaurant years before, the others never having worked in one ever. And they crap all over the staff, intentionally or not. And yeah, so what I mean there is like kind of what I was just saying earlier is that sometimes you would have people that would come into the restaurant, and feel like they're one of the staff because at some point 40 years ago or 25 years ago they worked in a restaurant. And it's like my friend, this is not the same, restaurant you worked in, let alone the same culture of restaurants that you worked in 30 years ago. The game has changed, pal. Don't know what to tell you there. And then there's some people that say that and then they go ahead and shit all over every, their server or whatever by either giving them a crappy tip or just being rude to them. My favorite was, if you're a good, like I used to have this all the time because most of these people, when they're going in and out of restaurants, 9 times out of 10, they're probably dealing with an idiot, like I'm sad to say, but this is kind of the people, especially nowadays, that work in the restaurant. And someone like me, I don't want to like pat myself on the back, but I kind of knew how to work with these guys. And one of the things that really would annoy me about being a server is like, even if you could make a personal connection with someone, there was always that one person who would never, ever, ever hesitate to remind you that you're their server and they're sitting down at a restaurant, and the best way that this would happen is you'd be conversing with them, talking, and then like they just hold up their glass of water for you to refill. Or my favorite, their phone would ring and they'd be like, I gotta take this, and then you just have to slip away like a slave, or you know what I mean, not a slave, but it's just it really puts you in your place, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So it's only one stop up the social chain. Again, I worked in corporate restaurants and watched these white-collar people act like jerks to the service staff due to their own ignorance or lack of respect for any service staff. Now, let me bring this back to my boy Saagar. That Uber comment I heard enacted this current internal thought. Has he ever driven Uber? I talk to Uber drivers all the time, but that doesn't mean I understand their day-to-day plights. Do you see the parallel? This is why I'm scared to fly private. If the chance ever comes, because once you go from flying private to commercial, these experiences will never be the same. Not even in first class. Haven't made my point clear yet. Oops. So to wrap this up, I'll leave you with this. God, I can't read. I'm getting old. The Points community, Krystal and Saagar created a non-establishment pro-worker down the middle-ish news podcast produced and hosted by a group of people claiming they are like you and me, when in reality they are not. My guess is that the majority of their audience demographic skews to the white upper crust area of most urban and suburban enclaves. That smaller group, the smaller group would be the working class stiffs like me who thought, oh, those two are just like me. Sometimes you two seem so disconnected from the rest of us. And that's definitely how I feel with them. It's now let me expand on that a little bit. So the whole way the show is structured is they put, all the clips on YouTube, the full episode on Spotify. But if you want to have, premium access, if you want to get behind the paywall, they have all these different tiered out things that you do. And, I don't even remember. I mean, off the top of my head, I remember one of them being like, it was like 10 grand and they would make something for you and send it to you. And you would be able to have like, say and how they, like almost like a producer credit where you can vote on which stories they would talk about or something like that. Again, I didn't care that much. And for me, that kind of reinforced my point that, this podcast is basically skewed towards upper crust white people, because who's going to spend 10 grand on premium access to a podcast, So to me, it feels like a lot of this is them. I guess my point is, what's the difference between, so they're not corporate news, but they're still beholden to, another group of people. So instead of being beholden to corporations, now they're held to whatever these people that pay them all this money is. And, spoiler alert, I ended up in a recent podcast over the last month or so, they kind of let it slip, or they just said on the podcast that the majority of their premium subscribers come out of California. And that shouldn't be a surprise at all. Wait, we got a phone call coming in from Ken. Let's see, what is he saying here? Ken, you're on the air, bro.
And that's Ready Set Podcast on Twitter, in care of Joe Persinger at
All right, Ken, thanks for calling in. I guess he had to, always do that. I put in this phone line, and, this is what happens when you give people access that they shouldn't have. Anyway, that's probably going to do it for us today. I don't really got nothing left for you. We almost went 50 minutes. I did not plan for this podcast to go 50 minutes. I was hoping for maybe half of that. But here you go. You guess you got some bonus footage and me rambling about nonsense. I hope you guys like the podcast. As you can see, there's a lot more changes. Brand new studio. The technology is really cool. Actually, let's do this before I get out of here. I wanted to talk about, some of the things that we're going to be talking about in the future. We have this Breaking Points podcast. I got a few more things I want to say about that. We're going to be looking at other podcasts and me giving my overall, either I'll be reacting to videos or kind of talking about the podcasts in a similar fashion like I did today. A few off the top of my head, would be Secular Talk with Kyle Kalinske. We're going to do the David Pacman podcast, Breaking Points, and also there's a few other stories that I want to get into. Right as we were doing number 56, I was planning out to do a video about Disney and its special district, and then all that news started breaking about Ron DeSantis basically taking away that special district status up until, I think, June of next year. So I'm going to do a podcast about that, kind of breaking that down. And there's a few other things. Actually, I could probably tell you right here. I got it all on the old computer and show map. The Pacman podcast. Oh, that's right. So another one I want to do about Disney is how the marriage of Disney and tech is not really beneficial to anyone but Disney itself. And then, that's the other one I want to do is we're going to actually kind of look at that show Veep and how Veep is – what is Veep? I mean, at the time when Veep came out, it was, it's art imitating life. But now Veep is turned into art imitating life. I'm already confused. I don't know what's going on. I sound like Joe Biden. Yes. I mean, Joe Biden, how much longer can we put up with this guy? We got the midterms coming up in a few weeks. I actually think we're doing a podcast. Going to break down the midterms. I think that's the next one we're going to do. We're going to talk about that really quickly. And we'll go from there. All right, anyway, enough of me wasting your time. Thanks for spending this hour with us. I know asking 50 minutes of your day is a big ask. So thank you for watching the podcast. Please like and subscribe. Share the podcast. Help us get us up in that algorithm, and please like the Facebook page and let me know what you think. You like it? You hate it? You want to take my hat? You want to see what my hair looks like? Whatever. It's a pretty interesting salad under there, and it's going to be a while before I ever do a podcast without a hat on. So anyway, you guys have a great one. I'll see you next time.